I stood beneath the chandelier I had chosen myself, smiling for donors at the gala I had brought to life, when I saw Daniel at the edge of the room. He had not said he would come. His tuxedo looked a size too tight, his jaw set in that stubborn line I knew from 1,000 silent evenings. It was almost 9 in the evening when our eyes met. The quartet slid into a waltz, crystal chimed, and I felt the first thread of my carefully stitched life loosen. I had arranged every flower, every table card, every clever sightline so the room felt warmer than Charleston's spring air. People congratulated me, called me a magician, a savior of dull halls, and I nodded as if I were whole. Then Daniel started crossing the floor. He did not rush. He did not rage. He walked like a man who had already reached his conclusion long before his feet began to move. I recognized the look. He had worn it on nights when he had turned off his lamp early, when he had told me he was tired, when his hand found my shoulder but not my waist, and when words about doctors and help dissolved into the dark like steam. He stopped a few steps away. The board chair kept talking to me about pledges, but I no longer heard numbers. Daniel's gaze slid to my left wrist, bare because my bracelet had broken that morning, then lifted back to my face. He knew something. I felt it the way a woman feels weather change through the floorboards. I wanted to step toward him to smooth the line of his lapel like I used to, but his eyes told me our shared language had already faded. The ballroom smelled of peonies and champagne. My lover was somewhere near the bar, laughing in that soft, careful way he used with me in public. I had thought the crowd would keep us safe. I had believed that if I wrapped my sin in gold light and applause, it would look like survival instead of betrayal. Daniel's hand slipped into his pocket. I imagined a note, a receipt, an object that did not belong to me but sentenced me all the same. I tried to breathe as if I were only overwhelmed by success. He said my name low, as if the sound might break. Gianna. I had heard him say it tenderly, and I had heard him say it from the other side of a locked body, the name landing without echo. Tonight it fell between us like a key I could not pick up. I remembered the night before, at about 11, when I had hushed the house and lit the candle that smelled like bergamot and rain, when I had touched his sleeve and asked if we might try again, if we might talk. He had closed his eyes and said it had been a long week. I had swallowed my plea and said it was fine. It had not been fine for a long time. The quartet ended their piece. Applause rippled. Daniel did not clap. He lifted his chin toward the far corner, where the silent auction items sat on velvet. "Could we step outside?" he asked. Polite, careful. It sounded like the way he had asked the doctor months ago, whether things like this just happened to men under pressure. I had heard about that appointment from a voicemail notification I was not meant to hear. He had gone alone. He had come home with a pamphlet folded into a square so tight it looked like a white stone. We walked along the edge of the room, past the oil painting of the old harbor, past my name stenciled in gold on the event board. People smiled at us, the beautiful couple, the designer and her architect husband. We were a picture framed by lies and good intentions. At the French doors, a waiter with freckles held one open. The night pressed cool and salt-sweet from the river. The sound of music softened. I could finally hear my heartbeat. He said, "I found something." His voice was steady, but I heard the effort in it. He pulled out his phone and tilted the screen. It showed a message bubble, just a sliver captured in a preview I had not meant to leave visible. "Good night. I missed the way you laughed in the stairwell." My name wasn't in it, but my laugh had been the most public thing about me that week. I had stood on those hidden stairs behind the ballroom at around 7, checking drapes and avoiding eyes. I had laughed at something small and private and allowed myself to feel wanted. The message fixed the memory in place like a pin through a moth. There it was. The fault line I had pretended was a hairline crack. I touched the cold iron of the railing. "Daniel," I said. It was all I could manage without confessing too much too fast. He watched me, the way a surveyor watches a wall lean, calculating angle and damage. I thought of the mornings when I had brewed coffee and set his favorite mug down with a hopeful clink, of afternoons when I had texted him at 2 asking if we could take a walk by the Battery after dinner, of nights when my body had waited beside him like a question he did not want to answer. The question had grown heavy. It had rolled out of our bed and gone looking for a place to rest. He slid his phone back into his pocket. He said, "Tell me I am wrong." He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse me with names or dates. He asked for an impossible rescue. I could not give it. The river wind pressed through the door and lifted a strand of my hair. Somewhere inside, someone laughed too loudly. The world kept its rhythms as if my marriage had just reached the point of no return. I had once believed the body could be patient forever, that love could outlast drought with grace alone. But loneliness had collected in me like silt, slow and sure, until a footstep in the stairwell, a hand at the small of my back, a room bathed in hush, had felt like a shoreline. I had told myself I was only standing there for air. I had told myself I would go back upstairs and make another toast. Then I had let a message arrive on my phone at midnight with a softness that did not demand explanations. I do not want to discuss this here, because the door stood open and the chandelier threw our shadows long across the floor. I had built an evening so beautiful it could hold a confession, but I was still the woman trained to protect her work. "Please, after the auction," I added, bargaining with minutes the way I had bargained with months. He held my gaze. He nodded once, as if he understood that a woman could carry two truths without dropping either. I loved the man who stood in front of me, and I had given a part of myself to someone else because I had been starving. We stepped back inside. The quartet began another song, something older that made couples drift closer. Daniel remained at my side like a fact. I drifted from donor to donor, said thank you, accepted compliments, and felt the past year unspool behind my eyes. Late-night drafts on his screen, early morning apologies that sounded like weather forecasts, careful kisses on my forehead instead of my mouth. The problem had entered our house quietly, then rearranged the furniture while we pretended not to notice. I had asked him to let me help. He had said he was fine. We had treated Hope like a guest room we never opened. At about 10, the auctioneer lifted his gavel. I clapped on cue. Daniel's hands stayed still. I understood that there would be no postponing the conversation, no graceful fade to black. My life would split before midnight into before and after. I straightened the place cards on the head table, a reflex. When I looked up, Daniel was watching me with an expression I had not seen since our early years, raw, unguarded, asking. I wanted to tell him everything had not happened the way it looked, that it had not been born from cruelty but from absence, that I had not stopped loving him even as I had stepped into someone else's arms. I wanted to tell him that the night before, when he turned away and said he was tired, I had still laid awake beside him, tracing the seam of his sleeve, willing the distance to close with sheer belief. The gavel fell. Applause rose. The chandelier glittered like a sky I had borrowed. I took Daniel's arm and we moved toward the corridor that led to the service stairs, the same narrow space where my laugh had been overheard and cherished by a man who was not my husband. I I had chosen those stairs because they were hidden, because the light there felt kind. Now they felt like a witness. As we reached the first step, I realized that the night's beauty had not been a shield, but a mirror. It reflected what we had been avoiding back at us with merciless clarity. I had built the room. I had also built the lie. And the man who once designed sanctuaries for other people now stood beside me, waiting to see if there was still a way to draw a doorway we could both pass through. Our marriage had looked graceful from a distance. 12 years of shared plans, dinners on the veranda, and polite laughter at the same jokes. 21 years old, we were enviable. Inside our home, silence carried more weight than words. It began in small ways. Daniel staying later at the office, me pretending to fall asleep before he came to bed. The space between us grew like ivy, slow and almost beautiful, until it swallowed everything. The first time his body failed him, we both laughed. It had been at the end of a long week, around midnight, when the air conditioner hummed too loudly. He kissed me with the same measured rhythm he used to sketch blueprints, deliberate and tidy, and then stopped, his breath catching. He said he was just tired. I told him it was fine. It wasn't. It happened again and again. Each time, he withdrew a little further, as if embarrassment were contagious. I tried to ease him, whispering that stress could do strange things, that we could talk to someone. He turned away, saying he didn't need a doctor, only rest. Months passed. I had begun leaving candles unlit, lingerie folded away, music turned down. At night, I lay beside him, counting seconds between his breaths, remembering when his touch had made me feel seen. Now, he compensated with small courtesies, a bouquet on my desk, praise for my projects, messages reminding me to eat lunch. They felt like placeholders for intimacy, gestures that said, I remember who we were, but I can't go there with you now. I became restless. Every mirror in the house seemed to reflect a woman dimming. My hands shook when I arranged fabrics for clients. My smile stretched thin during meetings. I told myself I had no right to complain. He was a good man, loyal, hardworking. But at night, when I turned and met his closed back, a quiet ache pooled in my stomach. I tried to wake him once, just to talk, but he muttered something about deadlines and rolled away. He had gone to see a doctor eventually, at my urging. The visit came and went like a secret. He never mentioned results, only said it was normal for men sometimes. I found the pamphlet later in his briefcase, folded into quarters. Erectile dysfunction, causes and coping. I read it sitting on the kitchen floor, the refrigerator humming above me. The page listed stress, anxiety, medication. It might as well have listed our address. I attempted patience. I cooked healthier meals, suggested weekend trips, tried to turn every touch into reassurance. He began to flinch from tenderness itself, as if affection might remind him of failure. One night, after an especially tense dinner, he said he didn't want me to feel obligated to pretend. I asked what that meant. He shook his head and went upstairs without answering. By then, even his absence in bed carried a shape. I filled it with thoughts of what had been, his early ambition, his laughter in our first apartment, the way he used to wake me before dawn just to watch light creep across the walls. I missed that man, the one who existed before this quiet illness hollowed him. I began to imagine what it would be like to feel wanted again. It wasn't a plan, only a thought that lingered like perfume. When the gala commission arrived, it felt like a lifeline. Work was the one place I could still control beauty. The hotel where the event would take place was one Daniel had designed years ago, back when his name carried awards and late-night excitement. I spent hours in those halls, adjusting fabrics, colors, light. That was where I met the man who would later text me goodnight.
He was part of the logistics team, funny, attentive, a voice that noticed when I sighed. At first, I told him about suppliers, shipments, tables, then somehow about insomnia. He listened. The first time his body failed him, we both laughed. It had been at the end of a long week, around midnight, when the air conditioner hummed too loudly. He kissed me with the same measured rhythm he used to sketch blueprints, deliberate and tidy, and then stopped, his breath catching. He said he was just tired. I told him it was fine. It wasn't. It happened again and again. Each time, he withdrew a little further, as if embarrassment were contagious. I tried to ease him, whispering that stress could do strange things, that we could talk to someone. He turned away, saying he didn't need a doctor, only rest. Weeks blurred. Each time Daniel declined to reach for me, I told myself it wasn't betrayal to imagine, only survival. But imagination turned to longing, longing to action. The night it finally happened, I came home past midnight, showered in the guest bathroom, and stood at our doorway listening to his even breathing. I wanted to crawl beside him and tell him everything, that I still loved him, but I was drowning in loneliness. Instead, I closed the door and whispered sorry to the dark. I don't expect forgiveness from anyone listening to this. Maybe you think you would have endured, that love should withstand anything. Maybe you're right. But living each day beside someone who refuses to see your pain is a quiet kind of dying. If you're hearing this now and want to understand how people reach such moments, how affection erodes grain by grain until silence feels normal, subscribe and stay with me. The next part isn't about excuses. It's about what happens when the emptiness finally answers back.
For a time, I believed I could keep both worlds standing. During the day, I was Daniel's wife, the designer with flawless hair and the perfect portfolio. At night, I was the woman whose skin remembered how to tremble. I convinced myself it wasn't about love. It was about feeling alive. Daniel had begun waking earlier than me, brewing his coffee in silence. I would come down to the scent of it, see his untouched breakfast cooling beside the newspaper, and feel a small panic that he might be slipping further away. He smiled more often now, but it wasn't warmth. It was strategy, the kind of smile you offer clients to keep peace. Once I brushed his arm as I passed. He stiffened, then asked if I could check the invoices for the kitchen remodel. The message was clear. Our marriage had turned into a polite collaboration. So I compartmentalized. I folded guilt into neat squares and hid it under my ribs. I told myself I was helping us survive the drought by finding water elsewhere, that it was mercy rather than cruelty. Every time Daniel turned away from my touch, the justification strengthened. "You deserve to feel wanted," the voice in my head whispered. He could fix this if he really wanted to. My lover never asked me to leave my husband. He was careful, too. We met in borrowed rooms, hotel suites Daniel himself had designed long ago, which somehow made the affair feel like poetic symmetry and punishment at once. I remember thinking that if Daniel ever discovered this, the irony would break him. That thought should have stopped me. It didn't. We never spoke Daniel's name. We didn't have to. His absence was the third presence in every room. When my lover touched me, it wasn't only pleasure, it was the proof that I still existed beyond disappointment. He asked once why I looked sad afterward. I told him it was the lighting. He didn't believe me, but he didn't press. Back home, Daniel had started spending more evenings on his laptop, researching something. I wondered if he was finally looking for treatments or therapy. When I asked, he said only, "I'm fine, Gianna. You don't have to worry." But I did. His denial had become a wall I couldn't climb. He had begun compensating with small acts, repairing the garden fence, surprising me with tickets to a play we never attended. When we tried to be intimate again, after almost 6 months, I had already crossed the line with another man. The attempt felt like an obligation. He reached for me with effort, not desire. When it failed, he whispered, "It's not you," and turned off the light. I lay there wide-eyed, the truth burning in my chest. It wasn't me, but it was killing me. From then on, I drifted through days wrapped in the illusion of normalcy. Our daughter noticed my distraction. She'd ask if everything was all right. I said yes, of course. How could I explain something that had no villain, only decay? Each morning, Daniel's coffee cup sat where it always had, half full, lukewarm. The pamphlet remained hidden in his briefcase, the symbol of a problem he refused to face. I began to resent that folded piece of paper more than the dysfunction itself. It represented silence, pride, denial, the real enemies of love. When people complimented our marriage, I smiled and felt something hollow echo inside. I had become an expert in symmetry, in arranging appearances until nothing looked broken. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could fix any room, but not the one I lived in. One evening, Daniel came home early. I had just returned from site inspection, the code I used for my affair. He kissed my forehead, said he missed me. For a moment, my breath caught. Maybe we could start over. Then he mentioned he was tired again, that work had been draining. He poured a glass of wine, turned on the news, and forgot about the moment entirely. That was when I knew the distance had become permanent. I looked at him that night as he sat on the sofa, light from the television flickering across his face, and I realized that I wasn't angry anymore, only numb. The part of me that had waited for his hand to find mine had withered quietly. And so I allowed the other life to expand, thinking I could control the boundaries. If you've ever convinced yourself that a small betrayal could coexist with love, you know how easy it is to get lost in the lie. I told myself I was preserving our marriage by taking my hunger elsewhere. But hunger, once fed, demands more. That illusion of security, of balancing both worlds, lasted until the night Daniel found the message. From that moment, the lines I had drawn blurred beyond recognition. The story I had built to justify myself began to crumble, and every quiet excuse echoed back as accusation. And that's how we reached that gala night, when one text message turned the life I had arranged so perfectly into a house of cards ready to fall. After the gala, silence returned sharper than before. Daniel no longer asked questions, and I mistook that for mercy. For a few days, he acted as if nothing had happened. He left for work early, sent polite messages about groceries or bills, and returned home at predictable hours. His composure unnerved me more than anger would have. I tried to carry on with work, forcing smiles in front of clients, while inside I waited for the blow that never came. The night after the event, I dreamed he confronted me, his voice breaking, but in reality, he said nothing. Only one morning did I notice a change. The pamphlet that had lived folded in his briefcase now sat flat on the kitchen counter. Erectile dysfunction, causes and coping. His way of acknowledging the disease between us. I stood over it as sunlight spread across the marble, reading the same words I'd memorized months before. It felt like a silent accusation, as if the paper itself asked what excuse I'd been using. Daniel had started going to the gym again, something he hadn't done in years. He came home smelling of iron and sweat. I thought maybe he was trying to reclaim something, his body, his pride. But each night, he said little, and the effort seemed to make him more distant. He had always solved problems through architecture, fixed the structure, the cracks vanish. But this was no blueprint he could adjust. The irony grew heavier. The hotel where my affair began had been his design, one of his proudest early works. He had drawn its curves and sightlines to create intimacy, comfort, and discretion, and that was exactly what I used it for. Each visit now haunted me with guilt. The curtains he had chosen, the amber lamps, the way light fell on the walls, all of it felt like Daniel watching without knowing. One afternoon, I found one of my earrings missing, a small silver hoop. I assumed it was somewhere in my office. Then, days later, Daniel asked if I'd lost jewelry. "He found this in my car," he said, holding up the missing earring. "Must have fallen when you borrowed it last week." His tone was neutral, but I saw the flicker of calculation in his eyes. I nodded too quickly, told him yes, that it must have slipped from my bag. He placed it on the counter and left it there, gleaming like evidence. After that, his behavior shifted in small, precise ways. He started checking his phone often, watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. Once when I came out of the shower, he stood by the doorway and asked how late I'd worked the night before. I said 11. He nodded, said nothing. The tension felt like living beside an unplugged bomb. My lover sensed the change too. He asked if Daniel suspected. I said no, even though I wasn't sure. The thrill that had once electrified me turned into paranoia. I began deleting messages obsessively, locking my phone, double-checking mirrors. Still, I couldn't stop seeing him. Addiction disguises itself as need. One evening, Daniel suggested dinner out. We hadn't done that in months. I agreed, relieved and anxious. He chose a restaurant by the waterfront, the same one where we had celebrated his first award years ago. We ordered wine, made small talk, and for a brief stretch, it felt like recovery. Then, just as the waiter cleared our plates, he leaned back and said, "Do you ever think about us, Gianna? About how we changed?" The question caught me off guard. I said of course I did, that we'd both been under pressure. He smiled faintly. "Pressure," he repeated, swirling his wine. "That's what the doctors said too. Sometimes pressure makes things stop working." His gaze held mine, calm, cutting. But sometimes it reveals where the cracks already were. I didn't answer. We left soon after, walking through humid air thick with salt and distance. When we reached the car, he opened the door for me, gentlemanly as always. The earrings still hung from the rearview mirror where he had tied it with a thread. "So you don't lose it again," he said. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The ticking clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator, Daniel's even breathing beside me. I wanted to shake him, scream, confess, anything to break the stillness. Instead, I lay there remembering all the times I'd mistaken his quiet for peace. The next morning, he left early. I thought about following him, about ending the affair before he did. But by the time I reached for my phone, my lover had already sent a message. Thinking of last night, couldn't sleep. I stared at it too long before deleting it. A minute later, another notification appeared. Daniel's message, short and formal. "We need to talk tonight." He came home later than usual. His shirt sleeves rolled, hair slightly damp from rain. I waited in the kitchen, the earrings still on the counter between us. He didn't touch it. Instead, he poured himself water, then looked at me. "I know," he said simply. There was no rage in his voice, only exhaustion. I wanted him to shout, to break something, to give me a scene that matched the chaos inside me. But Daniel was an architect. He built his fury in silence, brick by brick. "I saw the messages," he added. "You didn't delete them all." The world seemed to narrow to the sound of rain against the window. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing coherent came. He set down the glass, the muscles in his jaw working. "You think I don't understand why? You think I haven't known I was failing you?" I shook my head, tears stinging. "Daniel, it wasn't—" He cut me off. "Don't lie to me now after everything else." That's when I saw the real damage. The humiliation he carried beneath composure. The way his pride had shattered. His dysfunction had once been a private wound. Now it was public,
tied to betrayal. The man who couldn't satisfy his wife had lost her entirely. The irony was cruel, perfect, and unbearable. He walked out of the room before I could answer. I heard the door to his studio close softly, the latch clicking like a verdict.
For 3 days, we didn't speak beyond what necessity demanded. Bills, groceries, the plumber coming on Friday. Every sentence carried the weight of things unsaid. Our daughter noticed but stayed quiet. Teenagers sense storms better than adults pretend. On the 4th evening, Daniel asked me to join him at a friend's dinner party. His tone was polite, almost casual. I said yes because I couldn't stand another night pacing the hallway outside his studio. I spent hours choosing a dress, trying to remember what color he once said looks good on me. It felt absurd to want to please the man whose heart I had just broken, but guilt makes people irrational. The house belonged to one of his colleagues, an open-plan masterpiece with glass walls overlooking the marshes. Everyone there was from Daniel's firm, people who once admired us as the creative couple. They greeted me warmly, oblivious to the fact that my husband now looked at me like a stranger. Dinner was loud and bright, laughter and clinking glasses. I tried to match the mood. Daniel, as always, was composed, even charming. He poured wine for others, told small jokes. No one would have guessed what had unraveled at home. Then, near dessert, the conversation drifted to relationships. Someone joked about midlife crises and therapy. Another mentioned that stress was the real killer in the bedroom. Laughter followed. I felt my pulse quicken. Daniel smiled faintly, looking down at his plate, and then said lightly, "Yeah, stress can ruin more than blueprints." The table chuckled. Then he added, "Sometimes it takes away what makes a man feel like a man." His voice was calm, almost reflective. I froze. A friend nodded sympathetically, not catching the edge beneath the words. Daniel looked up, eyes on me. Of course, that's when communication matters, doesn't it? When things stop working, some couples talk it through. Others, he paused, letting the silence fill in the rest, find other ways to cope. The table grew quiet. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. No one said my name, but every gaze seemed to flicker toward me, then away. Someone changed the subject quickly. Real estate, I think. The laughter returned, but thinner, nervous. I sat through the rest of the evening, smiling mechanically, tasting humiliation like iron on my tongue. The man who once guarded his private pain now wielded it as a weapon. I couldn't blame him entirely. His pride had been crushed twice, first by his body, then by me. Now he needed witnesses to reclaim control. When we left, I walked ahead to the car. The night air was heavy with salt. Daniel unlocked the doors but didn't get in. He stood on the curb staring at the marsh. "You made me a joke, Gianna. Do you know what it's like to have your manhood discussed between jokes about deadlines?" Tears burned behind my eyes. "You brought it up, Daniel." He turned to me. "Because it was already everywhere. In your eyes, in your silence, in the way you looked through me every night." I had no defense that didn't sound cruel. I whispered, "I was lonely." "Lonely?" He laughed once, a short, bitter sound. "You are impatient. You think a few bad months justify tearing us apart?" It wasn't months. It was years of pretending. He stepped closer. "I was trying. Do you know how it feels to want someone so badly and fear failing again? To dread the look in her eyes when it happens?" His voice cracked on that last word. For the first time in months, he looked human again, not composed marble. I wanted to touch him, to say something healing, but the space between us was crowded with ghosts. My guilt, his shame, the echo of another man's touch. He finally said, "I can't even hate you properly. I just keep replaying everything, wondering if I ever had a chance." We drove home in silence. The headlights painted fleeting gold lines on the road. Brief,
disappearing paths. That night, he didn't sleep in the studio. He lay beside me, facing the ceiling, his breathing uneven. I stared into the dark, wondering when love had turned into damage control. Around 2 a.m, he whispered, "Do you still want him?" I didn't answer right away. "I wanted what he gave me," I said quietly. "Attention, touch. You used to give me that." He exhaled sharply. "So that's the price of a man's failure then? One bad organ and the rest doesn't count?" "It's not about your body," I said, voice trembling. "It's about the silence that followed." He turned to me. "Don't dress it up, Gianna. You punished me for being broken." The truth hung there, cruel and exact. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, but some part of me knew he wasn't entirely wrong. He closed his eyes and whispered, "You should go sleep in the guest room." I did, because I wanted to, but because staying beside him felt like trespassing on sacred ground. That was the night our marriage finally died, not with a fight, but with exhaustion. The following morning, he didn't say goodbye before leaving. The earring was gone from the counter. At work, I kept rehearsing what I might say if he ever asked for explanations. But Daniel no longer sought words. He was done asking. If you're listening to this and you've ever been caught between guilt and unmet need, you know the trap I'm describing. You know how easily a secret turns into a sentence. If you understand that silence can kill a marriage faster than betrayal ever could, leave a like right now. Because what came next proved that even humiliation wasn't the end of our story.
For a while, we drifted in a fragile truce. No more public remarks, no questions. The air at home had that sterile calm of a hospital corridor, tidy, silent, full of unspoken pain. Our daughter left for a week-long school trip, and her absence stripped away the last excuse for pretending we were fine. The morning after she left, Daniel sat at the breakfast table reading an article he wasn't seeing. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. Without looking up, he asked, "Was it worth it?" My throat tightened. You really want me to answer that? I wouldn't have asked otherwise. I sat across from him, the smell of coffee thick between us. It wasn't about him, I said. It was about feeling like I didn't exist anymore. He folded the newspaper carefully, aligning every edge. That's the line, isn't it? The one everyone uses. I felt invisible. Meanwhile, you destroy everything to be seen. Daniel? No, he cut in. You think I don't know what happened to me? I wasn't sick, Gianna. I was scared. I felt your disappointment every time I failed. I felt it like a hand around my throat. I swallowed hard. I never meant to make you feel that way. He looked up, eyes glassy but hard. But you did. You kept score, even when you pretended not to. Every time I tried and failed, you looked at me like I was less. I looked at you like I was losing you. He shook his head slowly. And then you made sure I really was lost. The words hit with the precision of a scalpel. I wanted to say that I had begged him to talk, that I had waited through months of rejection, that I had tried to build intimacy in other ways. But what came out was smaller, truer, and more damning. I needed to be touched, Daniel, just once, without apology. He flinched, jaw tightening. So you found someone who didn't have to apologize. I found someone who looked at me. He leaned back in his chair, laughter sharp and hollow. You think he saw you? He saw a woman desperate to feel wanted. That's all. You handed him your loneliness and called it love. I felt the sting of tears but forced myself to stay calm.
Maybe. But it reminded me what being alive felt like. Do you know how many nights I lay beside you wondering if I'd already died? He stood abruptly, chair scraping. You killed us, Gianna, and you want me to feel sorry for your reasons? I'm not asking for pity. Then what? His voice cracked. Forgiveness? Understanding? You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and see pity in their eyes? They all heard. You think they don't talk? The man who designs perfect spaces can't even keep his own home intact? I never told anyone. You didn't have to. His expression softened suddenly, almost weary. You told them every time you looked through me. Every time you smiled too wide, too forced. People notice when a wife stops loving her husband. I stood trembling. Don't twist this, Daniel. I didn't stop loving you. I just stopped waiting for you to notice I was still here. He turned away, voice low. I would have fixed it if you'd given me the chance. You had every chance, I whispered. He didn't answer. For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking. Each second, another reminder of the time we'd wasted trying to pretend our marriage wasn't suffocating. Later that day, he sent me a message. I'm going away for a few days, don't call. I read it standing in the hallway, the smell of paint still clinging to the walls from a project I'd finished before everything fell apart. He left that evening with a single suitcase. Watching him drive away, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. For the first time in months, the silence wasn't shared. It was mine alone. During those days, I replayed everything. I saw the first night his body had failed him, the first time I'd chosen silence over confrontation, the first message I'd sent to another man. Each small surrender had led us here. When Daniel returned, he looked different. Thinner, sunburned, but calmer. He didn't say where he'd been. He only asked if our daughter had called. Then after a pause, he added, "You don't have to move out. Not yet." We lived like polite ghosts after that. Two people occupying the same coordinates, but different timelines. He had built a wall out of pride and quiet hatred, and I, out of guilt, kept furnishing it. But life has a way of forcing closure. One evening, I walked past his studio and saw his laptop open on the desk. A single video window glowed on the screen. A security recording from the hotel, date-stamped months earlier. My name appeared on the reservation. I froze. He looked up from the doorway. "You left a trail," he said simply. I had to see if it was true. The humiliation was complete now. Not because he'd caught me, but because he'd been desperate enough to look. That night, I told him everything, every detail. The truth poured out like something toxic finally leaving my body. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness. It was resignation. And yet something in his tone made me realize this wasn't the end of him. There was a strange steadiness in his eyes, a glimmer of intent. I didn't know it then, but that calm was the beginning of his redemption. Because within weeks, Daniel would find something that not only changed his life, but forced me to see him again. Not as the broken man I had betrayed, but as someone reborn. And before that happened, before everything transformed, he discovered the one piece of evidence that tied our story and his humiliation to the very problem that started it all.
It happened one late afternoon, about 3 weeks after the confession. I was in my studio reviewing color palettes when Daniel knocked once on the doorframe. His voice was calm, that same restrained tone he used with clients when delivering bad news. "I need you to see something," he said. He held out an envelope. Inside, I found a glossy photo, the sweet key card from the hotel. On it, written in my handwriting, were the initials GR in a sketch of a tiny flower, something I used to doodle on my notes. I felt the blood leave my face. "Where did you get this?" He leaned against the doorway, eyes unreadable. "I stopped by the hotel last week, said I left some materials behind from a project years ago. The manager remembered you. He said you always asked for the same room, the one I designed." My chest tightened. The room, the place I thought was hidden by shadows and closed curtains, was now a crime scene of memories. Daniel continued, voice low. "Do you see the irony, Gianna? I built that suite for intimacy, for people to feel safe enough to touch, and it became the one place I was completely erased." I couldn't look at him. Every inch of that space came back to me. The amber lamps, the marble counter he had chosen, the bed frame he had drawn with perfect lines. My betrayal had unfolded in the geometry of his hands. He stepped closer. "You used what I made to destroy me." The accusation wasn't shouted. It didn't need volume, only truth. I wanted to speak, to explain, to say I hadn't chosen the room on purpose, but maybe part of me had. Maybe I wanted to feel close to him even while being far away. He placed the keycard on my desk and turned to leave. Then he stopped, his voice quiet but trembling. "When it started, my problem, you asked if I'd see a doctor. I was too proud. I didn't want to admit weakness. I thought avoiding you would make it fade. Instead, it grew. You think you were the only one lonely? I was humiliated every time you touched me." He swallowed hard. "You think I didn't know what that man was giving you? I could see it on your skin. The glow, the ease. You came home softer. I hated you for that, but I hated myself more." I couldn't hold back tears. "Daniel, I never wanted to destroy you." "I know. That's what makes it worse. You just wanted to feel alive, and I was the one thing standing between you and that feeling." For a moment, he looked fragile, like the man I'd married years ago, the one who still believed beauty could fix everything. Then his expression changed. A faint, determined calm settled over him. "I'm leaving tomorrow. Don't worry, I'm not running away. I need to fix this. Not us, me." "Where are you going?" He hesitated, then said, "Somewhere I might find a solution. A doctor online mentioned a treatment, something natural, something different. I'm going to try." And that was how Daniel left, quietly, with dignity, taking nothing but a duffel bag and the broken pieces of his pride. I didn't know where he went. For weeks, no messages, no calls. Then one evening, a text arrived. "I found something, Gianna." Just that, nothing more. When he returned 2 months later, the change was visible before he even spoke. His posture, his eyes, everything radiated calm confidence. He looked alive again. He smiled at my stunned expression. "I'll explain later," he said. "But I finally slept, Gianna, and I woke up wanting to be here." I didn't ask how or what. The answer would come soon enough, but I could already sense it was something remarkable. And if you're listening now, maybe you're wondering what he discovered. What could turn a broken man into someone reborn? Tell me something. If you were in Daniel's place, humiliated, betrayed, but still capable of change, would you have fought for yourself or walked away forever? Write it in the comments, because what Daniel did next not only transformed his body,
It changed everything about how I saw him.
He returned in late autumn when the leaves in Charleston had turned the color of rusted copper. I was in the garden when his car stopped at the gate. The sight of him made my chest tighten, not because of guilt this time, but disbelief. His shoulders were relaxed, his stride firm. There was color in his face again, and something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Quiet certainty. He greeted me with a small nod. "I came back to return your key card," he said, handing it over. The same one that had once felt like evidence now felt irrelevant. "I don't need it anymore." We sat on the porch where we used to drink coffee on Sundays. The silence between us was gentler now, stripped of accusation. "I went north," he began, "to see a specialist. Not another doctor with pills or lectures, someone different. His name's Dr. Jerry Burroughs." He paused, watching my reaction. "He's not what you'd expect. No clinics, no prescriptions, just knowledge and something natural." I listened, still unsure if this was confession or revelation. "And did it work?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "It did. Completely. But it wasn't just about my body, Gianna. It was about everything I'd buried with it. Pride, fear, all the noise that made me forget what it meant to feel alive. What that man offered you wasn't just touch. It was presence. I had forgotten how to give that." He leaned back, looking out at the slow river behind our yard. Dr. Burroughs called it the masculinity coffee. 3 simple ingredients you probably have at home. I started drinking it every morning for 2 weeks and everything changed. Energy, focus, confidence, even how I slept. I didn't think it was possible until it happened. I stared at him, half curious, half afraid. "So, you're—" "Yes," he said quietly. "Whole again." There was no arrogance in his tone, only peace. I realized then that his healing had come from more than whatever he had mixed in that cup. It had come from deciding he deserved to heal, even after being broken. Over the next hour, we talked about everything we'd avoided for years, not to rekindle the marriage, that ship had long drifted, but to close it with honesty. He told me he'd forgiven me, not because I'd earned it, but because holding on to anger meant keeping the worst version of himself alive. Before leaving, he touched my hand. He said, "I'm not the man you betrayed anymore. I'm the man who survived it." As he walked away, I watched his silhouette fade into the goals of late light. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to follow. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. They end with understanding. I still see him sometimes at local events, laughing, alive. He always has that same calm glow, as if life finally answered him. And if you're wondering how Daniel discovered exactly what those 3 mysterious ingredients were, I'll tell you this. Look in the pinned comment of this video. There's a direct link to Dr. Jerry Burroughs' full explanation about the masculinity coffee, the same natural mix that restored Daniel's confidence and changed everything. But hurry, that information may be taken down at any moment. Dr. Burroughs has been limiting access and the details might disappear without warning. Sometimes I think about that night at the gala, how everything seemed to collapse under the weight of what we both refused to face. But if that collapse hadn't happened, Daniel might never have found his way back to himself. Maybe that's what redemption looks like, not forgetting, but transforming the pain into proof that healing is still possible. And so it ends, not with revenge or reunion, but with truth. The man I once broke rebuilt himself, one cup at a time, until he remembered what it meant to feel alive. Maybe it was never about betrayal at all, but about learning that silence can break a body faster than time ever could.